We have the biggest gear you can buy. This is the ultimate wildlife comparison. The Sony, Nikon, Canon flagships with their 600 f4s. We're gonna find out what the very best wildlife gear you can possibly buy is. Now you talk.
But first, we want to thank our sponsor, Adorama. If you're looking to buy gear like this, you can make it happen at Adorama. They have great deals and a huge selection for creators, including lenses, cameras, lights, backpacks, computers. If you can think about it, they probably have it. So go to the link down below and shop at Adorama. Thanks.
They even have gear under $20,000. So you can ask somebody there for recommendations or check out the previous review video we did of wildlife zooms if your budget isn't quite this high, because who on earth can afford to spend, I think this is over $22,000.
Dr. Martin.
It's not just dentists, there's also
Surgeons.
orthopedic surgeons, some chiropractors. You can't even get these things on camera. They're so heavy. Okay, shut up. We're filming here.
Stop being here. We're talking about gear. All right, let's get the most painful part out of the way, and that's the price of these things. Let's start with the most expensive setup, and that's the Nikon Z9 with the 600 f4.
That is $21,500. That includes the Z9, the 600 f4 TC, and 1 terabyte of memory card redundantly. So 1 terabyte times 2. A little bit cheaper than that is this Sony here at $21,050.
Please keep your voice down, Tony. I'm scared.
And the least expensive here is the Canon at about $17,000 with the Canon R5, which is their current high megapixel flagship mirrorless camera. So you could save yourself 27% by going for the Canon. That's actually a pretty significant amount of money.
I'm just laughing because you can't have these and me in the frame. You have to choose.
Should we keep points and score these?
Why not?
Okay, how many points would you give Canon?
71.
71 points for the Canon. Okay, Canon is in the lead by 71 points. But let's talk about weight.
You missed an opportunity. Weight. Let's talk about weight. It's puns. While we're talking about numbers.
Weight. Let's talk about weight. See what I did there? Totally original joke that I just wrote. The lightest here is the Sony, and it is not light at just shy of 10 pounds, but it is manageable. And you're a tiny person and you handhold this on the regular.
Yeah, but I'm unusually strong. Like my strength to size ratio is just off the charts.
Yeah. So if you want something lightweight that you could really hike with, but is still pocketable, this at just under 10 pounds is going to be your best bet. In second place is the Canon. It's basically the same weight.
4 ounces heavier, so you probably won't notice that much. And then the heaviest is the Nikon, and that is over 10 pounds. It's about a pound heavier than the other setups, and that's mostly because like the Z9 is a big chonker of a camera. It's got the built-in grip. If you're into that type of thing, you might not mind the extra weight.
You could use the Z8 on it, but I chose the Z9 because it has 2 fast memory cards and I like to write RAW to both. And so that's the reason we went with the Z9.
I mean, you can use a tripod when you're shooting to mitigate issues with weight if you want to use a big prime like this. But I also recommend just like weight training because it's also just good for you.
The price was worth 71 points. So how many points should we give the Canon and the Sony?
The Sony was the lightest, so I give it 75 points.
Oh, okay. And what about the Canon?
Just 4 points.
Oh, wow. 3 ounces in weight difference is worth almost the same as $7,000 in cost. I am concerned about this. People might be upset about our scoring system.
Let's go on to our next category. Let's talk about the frames per second. So the Sony has the most frames per second RAW at 30 frames per second. The Nikon shoots 20 frames per second RAW, and the Canon R5 also shoots 20 frames per second RAW. The issue that I came up with the Canon is that you do get some rolling shutter, and that's when you're panning and straight lines go tilted, or if your subject is moving really fast, it could distort some of the movement. And that's because the Canon's the only one that does not have a stacked sensor. You can mitigate that problem by shooting with the mechanical shutter, but then your frames per second goes down to 12 frames per second and it's no longer silent either. I give the Canon 5 points, I give the Sony 32 points, I give the Nikon 1 point. Next, I want to talk about buffering, and that's when you hold down your shutter and take as many pictures as you can, and at some point your camera starts reading so much that it just can't take pictures anymore, or it slows down. If you're shooting with the Nikon Z9, it's not a problem. You're not going to be buffering. If you're shooting with the Sony, you're going to get in quite a lot of shots before you start to have a problem with buffering, and the Canon is going to start buffering relatively quickly. That means that if an animal's coming at you like a bird and you're not sure how quickly they're going to come or how close they're going to get, you're taking as many pictures as you can, they get as close to you as you've ever seen, and then boom, your camera starts buffering and you miss the shot. So buffering can be a huge problem. If I had to give points to each of these cameras, I'll give them all 1 point, just to make it easy for me. Let's talk about Precapture, because the only one of these cameras that has it is the Nikon Z9. And that's when your camera is recording 1 second before you press the shutter. So if your reflexes are not fast enough to get that bird jumping off of the branch, don't worry, the Z9 will have that information for you and you'll get those shots. The one thing is that it's only a JPEG, but it's still better than nothing. And like I said, the Nikon's the only one that has it, and that's why I'm giving the Nikon 3 points. Really stingy with the points. Wow. These are getting so many points. That's how good these are. If you want to get cameras and lenses like this, you can check out our sponsor, Adorama. They sell all sorts of stuff for creators, from lenses to cameras to lights to backpacks to tripods to straps. Anything you can think of that a creator would need, they have it.
Because they are creators and they support unbiased reviews like this. We're not sponsored by any camera or lens manufacturer. When you use our link here to buy any of your camera gear, you support Adorama and they support us, and that makes this kind of thing possible. So thanks for sponsoring us, Adorama.
Also, Sony sent me this jacket. Is that suspicious?
It has been raining off and on here, but that happens in wildlife photography. Sometimes you get caught in the rain. Sometimes you go out in the rain, and some of my best shots are taken in the rain. All of these cameras, all of these lenses have weather sealing. So I'm just going to call that a tie. The place where it's not a tie is video. The Nikon Z9 is the clear winner for video. It's the only one of these cameras that will do 8K at 60 frames per second. And those higher frame rates are so critical for wildlife video. I'm getting more and more into it and shooting more video than stills nowadays because it is so powerful and because video is so easy to share. One thing I noticed, that animals move so fast that if you play it back at full speed, it seems like it's sped up. I think because we're so used to seeing wildlife video slowed down. So 60 frames per second is a bare minimum, but I often will shoot 120 frames per second and slow it down 4 times slow motion. The Nikon has raw video codecs that capture about as much information as the raw files do. And that's really useful for black and white birds like osprey or in backlit situations. And it lets me adjust the exposure in post. The other cameras will do 8K at 30 frames per second. The Canon will do raw. The Sony does 8K 30, but not in raw. So you don't have that latitude. The Sony also will not do animal eye detect in video, which is really frustrating. So you're kind of stuck using the center autofocus point and trying to keep the subject there. And Mark Smith does it to great effect, but I find it challenging. I like having it pick out the subject from the background for me. The Canon does eye detect in video, but the Canon has a disadvantage in that it has that rolling shutter that Chelsea talked about. And if you're doing a whip pan or something, you'll definitely see it. So that loses a couple of points. So for me, the winner for video is the Nikon. That's what I've been using to shoot my own wildlife video. It has the most versatility. I can shoot raw. It's still not perfect. Like, it'll do 8K 60, but it only writes it to 1 card, and I really wish it had some redundancy. But of the 3, it's definitely the strongest for video. Let's talk about the technology in the cameras. The Nikon has a pretty good electronic viewfinder, but it's quad VGA. It's pretty low resolution. And when I use it, it detracts from the experience a little bit. The viewfinder is kind of pixelated. It feels like you're looking at a screen. Whereas the Canon has almost twice as many pixels, and it does look quite a bit sharper. The Sony has by far the highest resolution viewfinder, and it does look the best with almost 3 times as many pixels as the Nikon here. And that's a big part of the experience for me. I like just watching the animals in the viewfinder. But it's worth noting when you start focusing or shooting, the resolution of the Sony viewfinder drops. It's still really helpful when you're reviewing photos. You end up using your viewfinder a lot, even for just reviewing photos, because the rear screens on all the cameras just absolutely suck. Like when it's suddenly sunny, like it is now, it's very hard to see the rear screen. I don't know why on $6,000 cameras they can't give us a nice bright OLED screen, but they don't. They also have equally appalling menu systems, all of them. The menu systems are so incredibly complicated. People who aren't super into 1,000-page menus and hundreds of menu options are definitely going to find that frustrating at times. So they all get negative 100 points for having a terrible, outdated menu system. The Z9 here, though, has one technical feature that I absolutely love. It has built-in GPS. So when I'm shooting, it tags each photo with my current location. And as a wildlife photographer, I find that so useful because sometimes you're hiking and you find a particular location and it's nice to be able to go back to that. Now, theoretically, you could do this with the phone apps connecting to the Canon or the Sony, but those work terribly. I just never have gotten them to work. Like they'll work when I set it up, but then as soon as I leave the house, it stops recording GPS. Now, if you spend $22,000 on a camera and lens, you probably don't want to lose it, right? So you should definitely get insurance. But it would be nice if these cameras had some sort of anti-theft technology in them, if they could be locked so they couldn't be easily resold, or if it had location tracking so you could remotely find it or disable it. As it is, if you're out in a remote location shooting wildlife photography and somebody wants $22,000 in gear, they just have to take it from you, and there's absolutely nothing to stop them from easily reselling it.
Next, let's talk about sharpness, and it's pretty much not that exciting. If you compare these large prime lenses to some of the zooms that we recommend, you're going to find that the big primes are sharper.
Here's an example of what we mean. On the left, we have the Sony 200-600, which won our wildlife comparison against the Sony 600 f4. Notice that the image is significantly smaller on the zoom. On the left, it doesn't reach a full 600 millimeters, but there's also quite a bit less detail. But you can also add a teleconverter to the 600 f4 and it adds detail, whereas we found adding a teleconverter to the 200-600 didn't add detail. And with the teleconverter, the 600 f4 is still at f5.6. It's faster than the 200-600 without the teleconverter. And here you can see massive amounts of detail from the 600 f4 with teleconverter combination.
But when it comes to the three setups that we're showing here, they're all about the same sharpness.
Here's a picture of a test chart. First, comparing the Nikon to Sony, zoomed in 300%. I really can't see any difference. Comparing the Canon to the Sony, no teleconverter, again, I just don't see any difference. Once we put the teleconverters on though, yeah, again, these look just about the same.
The only caveat is that the Nikon has that built-in teleconverter, so you are able to get to closer and have higher resolution with the teleconverter.
Let's imagine there's a Nikon and a Sony shooter side by side. The birds are flying pretty close, so the Sony shooter decides to leave off the teleconverter. But the best shot of the day happens a little bit further away when you would need to crop. Let's compare the resolution we get from the Nikon with a teleconverter to the Sony with just a crop. Zoomed way in, we see just distinctly more detail from the Nikon. In these situations, the Nikon always has a teleconverter. It's always ready. For sure, in those scenarios, the Nikon wins.
But you can bring your own teleconverter with the Canon and the Sony. It's just a little more work. So give them all 1,000 points.
Just for fun, here's the new telephoto lens on the iPhone 15 Pro Max versus the Nikon Z9 with the teleconverter. Okay, that is not a small difference. Maybe we still need real cameras for something.
When it comes to autofocus, again, they're all really close. I'd say that the Canon R5 is not as intelligent with the autofocus as the Nikon and the Sony, but the Nikon in second place. It's really good, especially with the updates, but I still think the Sony Alpha 1 has the best autofocus. It's very close between the Nikon and the Sony though. So I give them all 5 points.
So in summary, which camera should people get? I think the Canon, while it's the least expensive and it still works great, the R5 here is pretty outdated, being 4 years old, and we're really waiting for the R1.
But for that savings in price, it's a camera that does everything and you don't want to spend as much money. I think it's a really great option.
But at the same time, neither of us are choosing it.
Do you think the R1 will ever come out?
I have been covering rumors for about 4 years now.
400 years. What about the Z9?
This is the camera that I'm going to pick.
Okay.
Because I am shooting more and more video and I like the video capabilities. I also really, really love this built-in teleconverter here. The ability to zoom back or zoom in means I'm getting more detailed shots, but I don't have to worry about getting too close in that dream moment when the bird comes right at you. That is such an accomplishment for Nikon because we did not like the Z9 when it launched with firmware 1, but I'm on firmware 5 now, and it hangs pretty well with the Sony. It doesn't match it in every way, but I think for mixed stills and video shooters, it's the best value out there. But which one are you picking?
My choice, not influenced by the jacket, is the Sony Alpha 1. And for me, it's because it shoots the 30 frames per second RAW. And I need that RAW because I'm often shooting in high contrast environments like a dark bird on a bright sky or an osprey, which is a two-toned bird. And then I also really like having the higher frame rate RAW because I'm able to get every little bit of action and still be able to edit completely.
In the comments down below, tell us what you're shooting with. And if you had an unlimited budget, like maybe you're an orthopedic surgeon, which one of these would you buy? And don't forget to subscribe because we have reviews of less expensive gear upcoming, as well as tutorials and our live show every Thursday at 5 o'clock where we review your photos.
And now you talk.
It's your turn. We're looking at you.
You never say anything. So it feels like I'm doing all the work in this relationship. Also, thanks to Adorama for sponsoring this video. If you're looking to buy gear, go check them out. They have great deals, good shipping, and also when you use our links, it lets them know we're doing a good job so we can make more videos like this. So check out the links in the description. Thanks.
Oh, one last thing, Chelsea. Can you just sum up the points for me? You were keeping track? How many points do they have?
Probably like 12.
Just
All
like
of them
who had
12?
the most? They all had 12 points.